There was a 2014 study that showed that Fortune 500 companies were more likely to pick a female CEO if the company was struggling, basically setting women up for the big job, but to also fail. If they did well, fine. But if they failed, like, look, we have a female CEO while failing. And that's what I feel like they did to Kamala Harris. When Biden refused to step aside and not run again, he was supposed to be that bridge. He backed off on that promise due to arrogance. And then he drops out after a catastrophic debate performance, and they set Kamala Harris up to fail.
Do you remember that viral clip? The one where left-wing commentator Sarah Isgard, almost comically, tried to shift the blame for Kamala Harris's humiliating collapse onto the DNC. No one was really surprised. Ever since Harris's campaign fell apart, the woke left has pointed fingers at everyone but her. They've made excuse after excuse, refusing to face the obvious truth. But Bill Maher wasn't buying into that flimsy defense. He tore it apart, piece by piece, exposing just how weak the argument really was.
No. No. You're saying 3 months wasn't long enough?
It was too long. It was long enough.
It was long enough.
If they had a primary...
It's not that they didn't have time to introduce. They met someone and they didn't like them.
If they had had a primary, they wouldn't have picked her. And if they had, she would have been able to rough out those edges that then she basically has to start from scratch with a campaign team she didn't hire that didn't like her, right? It was his team. And so I wonder if that next Democratic person, maybe someone's not even on our radar yet, because frankly, when you look at the history of who's there's two types. The one who waited in line, who was next in line, and then there's the one who comes out. That's Obama, that's Clinton, that's Reagan to some extent.
The woke left has a pattern. You'll notice they never admit defeat. And that's exactly what Sarah Isgard is doing here, desperately clinging to weak excuses. Months have passed since the elections, yet Kamala Harris hasn't shown the slightest improvement. Nothing has changed. But before we get to her most recent gaffe, let's take a quick look back to 2016, at one of the very reasons so many people chose not to vote for her.
Here is Kamala speaking out not against radical Islamic terrorism and illegal immigration. No. Here she says we must have the courage to object to the terms radical Islamic terrorism and illegal aliens.
We must have the courage to object when they use that term, radical Islamic terrorism, which ignores how Muslims have overwhelmingly been the greatest victims of terror. And we must also have the courage to reject that term illegal alien.
That was Kamala Harris, unbelievably standing in defense of Islamic extremists who had already inflicted unimaginable suffering on innocent people, not just in their own countries, but around the world. At a moment when radical Islamic terrorism was a deadly and undeniable threat, Harris chose not to confront it with strength or clarity. Instead, she urged Americans to look away, to pretend the danger didn't exist. Rather than addressing the bloodshed and destruction caused by extremists, she brushed it aside with empty, hollow words. But it didn't end there. Harris went further, insisting that Americans should abandon the term illegal alien, as if playing with language was somehow more important than protecting citizens. Meanwhile, the reality was clear. Unchecked illegal immigration was already straining our cities, draining resources, and putting children in harm's way. What Harris offered wasn't leadership, it was reckless denial, dressed up as compassion.
It didn't take long after Kamala Harris was installed as the Democrats' presidential candidate for the media to start rewriting her history. Apparently, she was never the border czar. She never had the most left-wing voting record in the Senate, and she was never considered a liability in the Biden administration. Those verifiable facts are all dismissed as right-wing conspiracies, as is the fact that she helped raise bail money for thugs during the BLM riots. Look at this headline claiming Trump falsely accuses Harris of donating to Minnesota Freedom Fund, bailing out dangerous criminals. Not only did Kamala do just that, her tweet is still up. Chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota. She posted that at the height of the BLM riot.
And just like that, Sarah Isgar's flimsy defense falls apart. Kamala Harris was never set up to fail. She created her own downfall. By throwing herself headfirst into the service of woke causes, she ignored the very responsibilities entrusted to her. Take the southern border crisis, for example. Harris was specifically put in charge, yet instead of acting with urgency and strength, she allowed chaos to grow. Rather than securing the border, restoring order, and protecting American communities, she chose a different path, squandering her political capital on pandering to the loudest voices of the far left. She spent her time virtue signaling, clinging to buzzwords, and chasing the approval of activists who care more about ideology than real results. This wasn't sabotage from the DNC, no matter how desperately Isgar tries to spin it. This was Kamala's own inability to lead, to prioritize, and to deliver on the duties she was given. She wasn't brought down by others. She brought herself down. And the American people saw it with crystal clarity.
And guess what? That link is still active. You can still donate, and there is Kamala's smiling face on the donation page. And Trump's campaign is doing its best to prevent this bit of history being memory hold. This is among their most devastating ads.
Harris sending this out on X. If you're able to chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota.
Thanks to Harris's promotion, the group reportedly raised $35 million in just a few weeks.
Darnica Floyd, charged with second-degree murder for stabbing a friend to death. She got out of jail too. A twice-convicted rapist, currently charged with kidnapping and sexual assault, and he walks out too.
The Freedom Fund raked in donations when it was promoted by many, including now Vice President Kamala Harris.
Sean Michael Tillman shot and killed a passenger on a train platform after reportedly being released from jail 3 weeks prior.
These were Kamala Harris's so-called achievements, long before the Democratic Party decided to crown her as their 2024 ticket leader. And let's be honest, there's nothing here worth bragging about. This is the same Kamala Harris who proudly raised money to bail out convicted criminals, individuals guilty of violent, unforgivable crimes against innocent Americans. While families were grieving and communities were living in fear, Kamala chose to side with the offenders instead of the victims. And she didn't do it quietly. She did it openly, almost as if daring the country to forget. So when Sarah Isgar shows up with the laughable claim that the DNC somehow set Harris up to fail, the truth tells a very different story. Kamala didn't need anyone's help in failing. She managed to do that all on her own. Her reckless decisions, her disastrous judgment, and her blind loyalty to bad causes created the perfect recipe for disaster. And the American people saw it all, clear as day.
The Minnesota Freedom Fund.
Donovan Boone was charged with breaking into the home of an ex-girlfriend and choking her. Freedom Fund bailed him out for $3,000 cash, and he hasn't shown up for court since.
I often don't even look at a charge specifics when I bail someone out.
The Hennepin County attorney called out the Minnesota Freedom Fund for bailing Mosley out of jail twice previously, even though he was arrested for having a gun in the courthouse.
The Minnesota Freedom Fund, which pays cash bail for low-income criminals, paid Tims's entire $10,000 bail in cash.
11 days later, police found a man bleeding from the head and ears in this alley. Police were able to arrest Tims in connection to this violent assault.
Howard was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The Minnesota Freedom Fund acknowledged supporting Howard's bail.
His so-called achievements weren't just her personal disasters. They were a reflection of the Democratic Party's warped values. It's naive to think she went rogue. The truth is, she had the full support and blessing of the leftist machine every step of the way. After all, Democrats have built a reputation for siding with criminals and lawbreakers, and Harris was simply carrying their torch forward. Just look back at how they acted during President Trump's push to secure the border and crack down on illegal immigration. Take Gavin Newsom, for example. When Tom Homan, the hard-nosed border czar, stepped in to enforce immigration laws and restore order in California, Newsom practically declared war on him. He wasn't protecting American citizens, he was shielding lawbreakers. That's the Democratic playbook. Stand with criminals, ignore victims, and undermine the rule of law. Kamala Harris didn't rebel against her party. She represented it perfectly, and the American people took notice.
This is a message for every single person who looks like me, specifically white women. It's time. This is no longer about politics, and you get to right your wrongs of 2016 when you didn't put a woman in the White House who was overly qualified. Now's your chance.
Thank God I don't look like her, because I think that means I don't have to listen to her. But you white women, well, sorry, but this is apparently a life and death matter. No hyperbole there.
What's fascinating is that white women weren't fooled for even a moment. They saw right through Kamala Harris's performance and, in overwhelming numbers, cast their votes for Donald Trump. Why? Because they understood exactly what was at stake. They could clearly see the disaster Harris represented, and they wanted no part of it. To these women, a vote for Kamala wasn't just a ballot. It was an open invitation to unleash dangerous criminals back onto the streets, threatening their families and their communities. They weren't swayed by the left's hollow promises or its phony compassion for lawbreakers. Instead, they chose something real: law and order. They chose safety over chaos. A leader who would protect the nation rather than coddle criminals. The message couldn't have been clearer. Harris's reckless agenda was toxic, and these women weren't about to sacrifice their security or their children's future on the altar of woke politics. They stood their ground and declared, "Not on our watch."
Everyone thinks you've been kicking back, drinking margaritas on the beach. But really, you've been hard at work writing a book, meeting with leaders, thinking about the future of our country. Who said that?
If you're sitting there scratching your head, wondering what on earth that bizarre clip was all about, let me break it down for you. It was Kamala Harris shamelessly promoting her brand new book. Yes, you heard that correctly. That awkward, cringe-worthy display wasn't a speech. It wasn't a message to the nation. It was an advertisement. An ad for a book she actually expects Americans to buy and read. And before anyone gives her the benefit of the doubt, no, she wasn't speaking to someone off camera. And she wasn't whispering some profound truth. She was just trying, and the emphasis here is on trying, to be creative. The result? Nothing short of pure embarrassment. This is what the Democratic Party now holds up as leadership: staged gimmicks, awkward theatrics, and hollow stabs at relevance. If this was her grand idea of connecting with voters, it's no surprise her campaign collapsed so spectacularly. Let's put it plainly. America dodged a bullet by rejecting Kamala Harris. Just imagine 4 long years of that inside the Oval Office.
I like these kinds of ear pods that have the thing, because I've served on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I have been in classified briefings, and I'm telling you, like, don't be on the train using your ear pods and thinking somebody can't listen to your conversation. I'm just telling you, that's a little bit more secure.
Yes, she likes the ear pods with the thing and just the mad cackling. I've got to say, I have missed that mad cackling. I've missed the incoherent, meandering, pointless sentences as well.
So what exactly was the point of that rambling nonsense Kamala Harris just delivered? At first, it almost sounded like she was praising her beloved AirPods. Then, in the very next breath, she flipped and insisted they weren't even the best. Which one is it, Kamala? Does she even know herself? And then there's the infamous cackling. The awkward, nervous laughter that comes out at the worst possible moments. What on earth was so funny? That uncomfortable chuckle has become her trademark, and not in a good way. Now, imagine Harris as president, sitting at the head of high-stakes negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Instead of steady leadership, the world would be subjected to word salads, contradictions, and that grating laugh echoing through the room. Disaster doesn't even begin to describe it. World leaders would be baffled. America's credibility would crumble. And our enemies? They'd be laughing even harder than she does. This isn't statesmanship. It's a train wreck waiting to happen. Thankfully, voters saw the warning signs before it was too late.
I mean, there's a lot of personal stuff in the book. I mean, poor Dougie.
You're blowing the lid off of Doug? What's going on?
For example, my birthday's in October. The election's in November. You see where I'm going?
Kamala, believe me when I say I have no idea what you're talking about or where you're going, and frankly, I don't think you do either. I think every sentence for Kamala is a bit of a mystery. She doesn't know exactly where she's going to end up or how she'll get there.
And this is the person Sarah Isgar expects us to believe was somehow set up to fail. Please. Kamala Harris didn't need anyone sabotaging her. She was a disaster from day one. Every year she spent as vice president was marked by one failure after another. Remember the border crisis? Biden handed her the job, and she couldn't even be bothered to visit for months. Inflation, crime, foreign policy disasters. On every front, Harris was missing in action, except for staged photo ops and cringe-worthy speeches. She failed at every task Biden assigned her, proving again and again she was hopelessly out of her depth. And while hard-working American families were desperate for real solutions, Harris was more interested in spouting woke slogans that only pushed people further away. Kamala wasn't set up to fail. She scripted her own downfall line by line, and the American people read it clearly. At the end of the day, Sarah Isgar's excuse collapses. Kamala Harris wasn't betrayed by the DNC. She collapsed under the weight of her own incompetence. From siding with criminals to ignoring the border crisis, from incoherent word salads to hollow woke pandering, she revealed time and again that she was unfit for leadership. The voters saw the chaos, the mismanagement, and yes, the endless cackling, and they wanted no part of it. Kamala Harris didn't just fail. She embodied the failure of an entire party's agenda. And when the time came, the American people delivered their verdict loud and clear. America deserves better. And that brings us to the end of today's video. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.